The Vampire King's hand closed around her wrist at precisely 11 minutes past midnight, and Delphine Thornwell barely managed to keep her grip on the 16th century manuscript she'd been cataloging. "Come," Nikolaus Valdren said. His voice held no warmth, no explanation. It never did. She should have refused, should have reminded him that she was on palace time, employed by the Historical Society to document his vast archives, not to be dragged through corridors by an immortal monarch who barely acknowledged her existence outside of terse corrections about filing systems. But he was already moving, and his grip, cool as marble, gentle as iron, left no room for argument. The spiral staircase appeared where she'd never seen a doorway before, stone steps worn smooth by centuries, climbing into darkness. Nikolaus released her wrist only to gesture upward. His white hair caught the lamplight, making him look carved from ice and moonlight. All vampires bore that coloring, that bloodless pallor, but on him it seemed intentional, regal, like he'd chosen to be winter itself. "I don't understand," Delphine said, hating how her voice wavered. "You will." He took the stairs 3 at a time. She followed because leaving felt more dangerous than staying. Her sensible work flats slapped against stone while his boots made no sound at all. The climb seemed endless, her thighs burned, her breath came short. Nikolaus never looked back. The door at the top was smaller than she expected, barely tall enough for his frame. He opened it with one hand, and cold air rushed in, stealing what little breath she had left. Then he stepped through, and after a heartbeat of hesitation, so did she. The rooftop stretched before them, a vast expanse of dark stone bordered by crenellations that had stood for 800 years. Beyond those walls, the vampire realm spread out in valleys and peaks, a landscape of perpetual twilight where the sun never fully rose and humans rarely ventured. The mountain castle sat at the highest point, and from here Delphine could see the glittering lights of the lower courts, the dark ribbon of the Night Vein River, the forests that hid things she'd been wise enough not to ask about. But Nikolaus wasn't looking at any of that. He was looking up. Delphine followed his gaze and understood. Snow. Not the pathetic flurries that sometimes dusted the ramparts, but real snow. Fat flakes drifting down from a sky gone soft and gray, catching the lights below and transforming them into something magical. The first flakes landed on the stone, on the crenellations, on her outstretched hand. They melted instantly against her warm skin, but clung to the ancient stone, beginning to dust it white. "It hasn't snowed like this in 103 years, Nikolaus said. He stood utterly still, his face tilted skyward. A snowflake landed on his cheek and stayed there, perfect and unmelting. "Not since before I took the throne." Delphine stared at him. In 6 months of working in his archives, cataloging his history, she'd never heard him volunteer information about himself. Their interactions consisted of her questions always answered with exactness, never elaboration, and his corrections, delivered with the emotional range of a granite statue. "Why did you bring me here?" she asked. He was silent for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. A dozen snowflakes gathered in his white hair, making him look even more otherworldly. Then, "You mentioned snow 3 weeks ago. You said you missed it." She had. A passing comment to one of the vampire scribes about Chicago winters, about how the realm's eternal twilight felt wrong without seasonal markers. She'd assumed no one was listening. Certainly not the king, who sat his throne at the far end of the great hall and seemed to regard her presence as he might regard particularly industrious furniture. "You remembered that," she said softly. "I remember everything." He said it without arrogance, simple fact. Then he moved to the northern edge of the roof and stood at the wall, looking out over his kingdom. The snow fell heavier now, beginning to obscure the distant lights. Delphine joined him, maintaining a careful distance. Her coat was inadequate for this cold, but she didn't want to go back down. Not yet. Something about this moment felt stolen, precious. The vampire king of the Valdren dynasty, ancient and untouchable, had wanted to share this with her, had thought of her, remembered her homesickness, cared enough to act on it. It complicated everything. She thought of the sealed letters in her room, the ones she sent to her actual employers. Not the Historical Society, they were real, but they were a front. The conclave of human affairs paid her salary. They wanted intelligence on vampire court politics, internal weaknesses, succession plans. Anything that might help maintain the fragile peace between species, or tip the scales if war came. She'd sent them transcripts of legal proceedings, maps of the castle, names and positions of court officials. Nothing directly damaging, she'd told herself, nothing that would get anyone killed, just information, just her job. But standing here, watching snowflakes catch in Nikolaus's hair while he studied his realm with something almost like tenderness, she felt the weight of her duplicity like a stone in her chest. "Are you warm enough?" he asked. The question startled her so much she almost laughed. "I'm fine. You're shivering. I'm human. We do that." His mouth did something that on anyone else might have been the ghost of a smile. Instead, he shrugged out of his heavy cloak black wool lined with silk, formal wear embroidered with silver thread, and held it out. When she hesitated, he simply stepped behind her and settled it over her shoulders. His fingers brushed her collarbone as he fastened the clasp. The touch lasted less than a second, but left her skin tingling. The cloak held no body heat, he had none to give, but it blocked the wind, and it smelled like him, like old books and colder things, winter mornings and metal. "Thank you," she managed. He'd already moved away, back to his vigil at the wall. They stood in silence while the snow accumulated, while the realm below slowly vanished under white. Delphine's thoughts churned. 6 months she'd worked here, 6 months of careful professional distance, of watching him rule with absolute authority and zero apparent emotion. He sentenced traitors to blood debt without flinching. He negotiated trade agreements with the precision of a mathematician. He spoke to his court in formal audiences and expected perfect obedience. But he'd brought her here to see snow. "The archives are nearly complete," she said, needing to break the silence. "Another month, maybe 2, and the Historical Society will have everything digitized." "I'm aware. Then I'll return to Chicago." "Yes." Something in his tone made her look at him. His profile could have been carved from marble, beautiful and remote. But his hands gripped the stone wall with enough force that she heard the faint grind of his fingers against rock. "Unless you need me to stay longer," she heard herself say, "for the cross-referencing, or the translation work." "The cross-referencing is clerical. Any vampire scribe can manage it." "Of course." She swallowed against an unexpected tightness in her throat. "Of course they can." The snow fell harder. Below, the lights were barely visible now, just a faint glow through the white curtain. Delphine wondered if anyone else in the castle was watching this, or if the king had claimed this moment for himself alone, for them alone. "Your work has been exemplary," Nikolaus said. His voice remained level, but something about the words felt carefully chosen. "Precise. Thorough. You understand context better than most scholars who have been alive 3 times as long as you." That almost sounds like a compliment. It is a fact. With you, I've learned those can be the same thing. This time she was certain his mouth moved. The almost smile returned, barely a softening, gone in an instant. But she'd seen it. Proof that somewhere under the ice, something lived. They stayed until the snow was ankle-deep on the rooftop, until Delphine's hands were numb despite the cloak, until the sky began its subtle shift toward the realm's version of dawn, still twilight, but lighter, grayer. Nikolaus finally turned from the wall. "You should rest," he said. "We have court in 6 hours." "We?" "You may find tomorrow's session relevant to your research. There is a property dispute involving documents from 1547. Your cataloging may prove useful." She nodded, not trusting her voice. This was his way, she had learned. Practical reasons for things that felt less than practical. Invitations disguised as necessities. They descended the spiral stairs in silence. At the bottom, he opened the hidden door, just another section of wall to anyone who didn't know, and gestured her through. The archives stretched before them, lamp-lit and familiar, so far removed from the magic of the rooftop that it felt like returning from another world. Nikolaus unfastened his cloak from her shoulders with the same careful precision he'd used to put it on. His fingers didn't linger. He folded the garment over his arm and stood there, waiting. For what, she couldn't say. "Thank you," Delphine said, "for showing me the snow. I know you didn't have to." "No," he agreed. "I didn't." He left without another word, his footsteps silent on the stone floor. She watched him go, watched the way he moved through shadow like he was part of it, and wondered what she'd gotten herself into. The next morning's court session was exactly as formal and lifeless as every other she'd attended. Nikolaus sat his throne-black stone carved with ravens and roses, symbols of the Valdren line, and heard petitions with the enthusiasm of someone reading tax documents. The property dispute did indeed hinge on a land grant from 1547, and Delphine was called to present the relevant documents. She explained the archive's findings. Nikolaus ruled in favor of the northern lord. Everyone bowed. Court continued. But twice she caught him looking at her, just quick glances, there and gone, but they landed like touches. That night, she wrote her report to the conclave. Subject continues standard court functions. Property disputes, trade negotiations. No sign of military buildup. Internal court dynamics remain stable. Recommend continued monitoring. She sealed the letter and gave it to her contact, a human servant who worked in the kitchens. Then she returned to her room and lay awake, staring at the ceiling, hating herself. The pattern established itself over the following weeks. By day, they maintained their professional distance. She catalogued. He ruled. They intersected only when necessary, their conversations clipped and purposeful. But there were moments now, small ones, that felt like cracks in the ice. He began taking his evening walk through the archives when she worked late. Never spoke unless she spoke first, but his presence became as regular as the lamps. Once, she found a pot of tea waiting at her desk, still steaming, though she'd told no one she was working through dinner. The blend was human style, black tea with bergamot, exactly how she took it. Another time, she was struggling to reach a high shelf when he simply appeared beside her and retrieved the volume she needed. His fingers brushed hers as he handed it over. He left immediately, but she stood there for 5 full minutes staring at her hand. She told herself it meant nothing. He was ancient, immortal, a king. She was temporary, human, replaceable, and a spy, which made every kindness feel like a betrayal. But then came the night she found him in the oldest section of the archives, standing before a portrait she'd recently cleaned and restored. It showed a woman with dark hair and kind eyes, dressed in clothing from 2 centuries past. "My sister," he said without preamble. "Elena. She loved snow, too." Delphine approached slowly, afraid sudden movement might spook him back into silence. "What happened to her?" "She fell in love with a human. The court opposed it. My father opposed it. They married anyway." His voice remained flat, but his hands curled into fists. "Humans age. Vampires don't. She watched him grow old over 50 years, watched him die, and then she walked into the sunrise, chose to burn rather than exist without him. I'm sorry. It was 173 years ago. That doesn't make it stop hurting." He looked at her then, really looked, and for the first time she saw something raw in his ice-pale eyes. "No," he said quietly. "It doesn't." The moment stretched between them, fragile and enormous. Delphine wanted to reach for him, to offer comfort, but she didn't know how to touch someone carved from winter. Before she could decide, he turned away. "You should know," he said, his back to her, "that I am aware of your secondary purpose here." Her blood turned to ice. Please don't insult us both with denials. You report to the conclave. You have since you arrived. I've known since the 2nd week." Panic clawed at her throat. "Then why haven't you—" "Because you have sent them nothing that endangers this court, nothing that violates our laws, and because—" He paused, and when he continued, his voice was softer. "Because I understand the impossible position your people put you in. They sent you here alone to gather secrets. You do what you must to survive. You should send me away." "Yes, I should." He finally turned back to face her. Snow had begun falling again outside the high windows, visible through ancient glass. "But I find I don't want to." The confession hung between them, stark and undeniable. Delphine's heart hammered. "Nikolaus, I have ruled for 206 years. I have fought wars, negotiated treaties, maintained peace. I have done everything required of me, and I have done it alone, because that is what kings do. We exist apart." His voice remained level, but intensity burned beneath it. "Then you arrived. You, with your questions about filing systems and your terrible jokes about medieval grammar. You, who touches my family's history like it matters, like they matter. You, who misses snow." "Stop," she whispered. "Why?" "Because I'm lying to you. Every day. Every report I send is a lie, even when I tell myself it isn't. I'm exactly what you shouldn't want. That, he said, is unfortunately not how wanting works. He crossed the distance between them in 2 strides, stopped just short of touching her, close enough that she could see the pale ring around his irises, the impossible perfection of his face. Close enough to feel the cold that radiated from him, the reminder that he was something other, something outside her understanding of life and death. I am giving you a choice, he said. You may finish your work and return to Chicago with the Historical Society's gratitude and the Conclave's compensation. I will ensure you have glowing references. Or. His hand rose, slowly, telegraphing the movement, giving her time to step away. She didn't. His fingers brushed her jaw, tilted her face up. His skin was cool and smooth, inhuman and careful. Or you stay, openly, as yourself, not as a spy. You choose me, and I choose you, and we face whatever consequences come. They'll call me a traitor. The conclave, the human governments, everyone will, I know. Your court will say you've gone soft, that a human has made you weak. They already whisper it. I find I don't care. His thumb traced her cheekbone, and she shivered despite his cloak. She'd been wearing it more often lately, and he never commented on it. I'm tired of being winter, Delphine. I'm tired of the cold. You make me want to thaw. She reached up and covered his hand with hers, felt the difference in their temperatures, the fundamental wrongness that somehow felt right. I choose you, she said. I've been choosing you for weeks. I just didn't want to admit it. This time when his mouth curved, it was a real smile. Small, uncertain, but real. Then we are both fools. Probably. He kissed her then, and it was like kissing winter itself, cold and sharp and beautiful. His mouth moved against hers with careful intensity, as if he was afraid she might break. She pressed closer, fisting her hands in his formal jacket, trying to communicate that she was stronger than he thought, that she could handle his nature, that she wanted this. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, well, she was breathing hard. He didn't need to breathe at all, but seemed to be doing it anyway. His forehead rested against hers. There will be complications, he said. Understatement. My generals will not approve. 3 of them already think I'm too distracted, too focused on maintaining peace when we should be expanding influence. This will provide them ammunition. Then we'll deal with them together. He pulled back enough to study her face. You would stand with me? Against your own people if necessary? I stopped being their spy the moment I fell for you. Everything since has just been me catching up. She managed something close to a smile. Besides, I've spent 6 months cataloging your family's history. I know exactly how stubborn the Valdren line can be. I don't think I could leave if I tried. Good. He kissed her again, slower this time, like he was memorizing the shape of her mouth. Because I have no intention of letting you go. They stood there in the archives, surrounded by centuries of history, while snow fell outside and the castle slept around them. For the first time in 200 years, Nikolaus Valdren felt something other than the weight of his crown. For the first time in 6 months, Delphine Thornwell felt like she was exactly where she belonged. But peace, she was learning, was always temporary. The first open sign of trouble came 3 days later. General Casimir Draven, head of the military forces, requested a private audience. Nikolaus granted it, but insisted Delphine attend as his archivist, a thin excuse, but one he could technically justify. She sat to the side with her tablet, pretending to take notes, while the real conversation unfolded. Your Majesty, Draven said. He was old even by vampire standards, his white hair hanging past his shoulders, his face all sharp angles and sharper eyes. The northern borders require attention. The werewolf clans are testing our boundaries again. I'm aware. I've assigned additional patrols. Additional patrols are insufficient. We need a show of force, a reminder of vampire superiority. Nikolaus leaned back in his throne. They were in the small audience chamber, more intimate than the great hall, but the raven and rose carvings still loomed. We have a treaty with the wolf clans. I will not violate it over minor territorial posturing. Minor? Draven's voice sharpened. They killed 2 of our sentries last month. In response to one of our patrols entering their marked territory, Captain Thorne exceeded his bounds. I've disciplined him accordingly. You've made us look weak. I've maintained peace. Draven's gaze flicked to Delphine, just for a second, but she caught the disdain in it. Peace built on the opinions of humans, on the sensibilities of those who don't understand our nature. Careful, General. Nikolas's voice dropped into something dangerous. You're coming very close to questioning my judgment. I question your priorities. This court needs strength, not another glance at Delphine. Distraction. The silence that followed felt like the moment before a blade falls. Delphine kept her eyes on her tablet, her heart hammering. She knew what Draven saw when he looked at her. Weakness, leverage, proof that their king had lost focus. You're dismissed, Nikolaus said. The words were soft, but they carried absolute authority. Draven bowed, stiff and minimal, and left. The door closed behind him with a solid thunk. Nikolaus didn't move, didn't speak. The silence stretched until Delphine couldn't stand it. He's going to make trouble, she said. He already is. Is he right? Am I making you look weak? Now he looked at her, his expression unreadable. You're making me look happy. In a court that has forgotten what that looks like, it reads as weakness. That is their failing, not yours. But if they move against you, then I will handle it. I have survived coups before. Draven forgets that I took this throne by force, not inheritance. I can hold it the same way. She wanted to believe him, but she'd spent 6 months studying vampire politics, reading the histories of court intrigue and power struggles. She knew how these things ended, blood or exile, sometimes both. That night, she burned her conclave contact information. The servant who'd been carrying her letters arrived for the usual pickup, and she handed him nothing, just told him the arrangement was over. He looked worried. He was probably on the conclave payroll too, but he nodded and left. She felt lighter immediately, freer. Whatever came next, at least she'd face it with clean hands. The next weeks passed in a strange tension. Outwardly, nothing changed. Court continued its rhythms. Delphine finished cataloging the 15th century documents and moved on to the 16th. Nikolaus ruled with his usual distant precision. But underneath, currents swirled. She noticed Draven in quiet conversation with other generals, noticed the way certain nobles watched her when she walked the halls, noticed the whispers that cut off when she entered rooms, and she noticed the way Nikolaus had begun positioning guards outside her quarters at night. Subtle, never mentioned, but there. You think they'll come for me, she said one evening. They were in his private study, a room she'd been visiting more often. He stood at the window, watching snow fall. It had been snowing on and off for weeks now, as if the realm itself reflected his changing mood. I think they'll try to use you to hurt me. That's different. How reassuring. He turned from the window. In lamplight, his pale features looked almost warm. I won't let them touch you. What if you don't have a choice? There is always a choice. I'm still king. She crossed to him, wrapped her arms around him from behind. He was cold through his shirt, but she'd gotten used to it. Sometimes she thought she felt warmer when he held her, as if her heat was enough for both of them. What if choosing me costs you the throne? His hands covered hers where they rested against his chest. Then I will have made the trade I wanted. Nikolaus, 200 years I have ruled. 200 years of doing what's necessary, what's strategic, what serves the realm. I'm tired of being only a king. He turned in her arms, pulled her close. With you, I'm something more, something better. If I must choose between the throne and that feeling, I know which matters more. That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. I'm aware. She laughed despite everything, pressed her face against his chest. His hand came up to cradle the back of her head, fingers gentle in her hair. They stood like that while the fire crackled and snow fell and the castle creaked around them. I love you, she said. She hadn't meant to. The words just escaped, true and terrifying. His arms tightened around her. I have lived for centuries. I have seen empires rise and fall. I have experienced every pleasure, every luxury, every achievement available to my kind. His voice was quiet, each word deliberate. And nothing has ever felt as necessary as you do. She tilted her face up. He kissed her deeply, thoroughly, until she forgot about generals and coups and everything except the feeling of being held by winter itself and somehow still feeling warm. But winter, no matter how beautiful, always had teeth. The coup came on the first night of what would have been December in the human calendar. Delphine was in the archives, working late as usual, when the first scream echoed through the castle. She froze, manuscript half catalogued. The scream cut off abruptly. Then came the sound of running feet, shouts, the clash of metal. The archive doors burst open. Not Nicholas, one of the younger guards, a vampire named Thomas who'd always been kind to her. "Miss Thornwell, you need to come with me. Now." "What's happening?" "General Draven has declared the king unfit. He's mobilizing forces. It's a coup." Thomas grabbed her arm, already pulling her toward the door. "The king ordered me to get you to safety." "Where is he?" "The throne room. He's holding them off," but another scream. Closer now. Thomas swore and changed direction, pulling her down a different corridor. "The escape tunnels. There's a passage that leads to the lower courts. You can hide there until—" "I'm not running." "Miss Thornwell, where's the throne room?" "You can't go there. The king's orders can go to hell if he thinks I'm hiding while he fights." She pulled free of Thomas's grip. "Which way?" He stared at her like she'd lost her mind. Maybe she had. But she'd spent 6 months learning this castle's history, its secrets, its hidden strengths. And she'd spent the last few weeks watching Draven and his allies, cataloging their movements, their relationships, their loyalties, the same way she'd cataloged centuries of documents. She knew things that might matter. "Fine," Thomas said, clearly deciding speed was more important than arguing. "But stay behind me." They ran through corridors that Delphine had walked 100 times, now transformed by chaos. They passed bodies, vampire guards who'd stayed loyal to Nikolaus, cut down by their own kind. She tried not to look too closely, tried to remember that this was the reality of vampire politics, the violence that lived under the courtly manners. The throne room doors stood open. Inside, the scene was surreal. Nicholas stood before his throne, sword in hand. Blood-dark vampire blood stained his formal jacket. Around him, a circle of his loyal guards held defensive positions, and surrounding them, maybe 30 of Draven's soldiers, weapons drawn. Draven himself stood at the center of the opposition. "Surrender, Valdren. You're outnumbered. Your reign is over." "My reign ends when I'm dead." Nicholas's voice was cold fury. "Come, try to kill me. Let's see how many of you I take down first." "It doesn't have to be that way. Abdicate. Leave peacefully. Take your human pet and go. I'll even give you a day's head start." "So you can hunt us down the moment we're outside the castle wards? I wasn't born yesterday, Casimir." Draven shrugged. "Then die. Either way, you're done. You've been weak for too long, distracted. The court needs real leadership again." That's when Delphine stepped into the room. Every head turned. Nikolaus's face went white, whiter than usual. "Delphine, get out of here." "Can't," she said, proud that her voice stayed steady. "Because the general here is wrong about a few things, and I thought he should know before he commits full-blown treason." Draven laughed. "The human wants to negotiate? How precious." "No, I want to inform you that you're an idiot." She walked forward, past the circle of Draven soldiers. They let her through, too surprised to stop her. "See, I spent 6 months cataloging the Valdren archives, every document, every treaty, every piece of correspondence from the last 800 years. And 3 weeks ago I found something interesting." Nicholas was staring at her like she'd lost her mind. Maybe she had. Her hands were shaking, but she kept moving, kept talking. "There's a treaty from 1673 between the Valdren court and the Draven line. Your ancestor, actually, General. He was neck-deep in debt and about to lose his estates. Nicholas's great-great-grandfather bailed him out. In exchange, the Draven line swore eternal loyalty to House Valdren, blood oath, binding on all descendants." Draven's expression flickered, just for a second, but she saw it. "That treaty was dissolved," he said. "Nope, I checked. It was amended in 1702 and again in 1809, but never dissolved. The oath still stands, which means that by raising arms against your sworn king, you're violating a blood oath nearly 400 years old." She stopped walking, standing now in the no-man's land between the two forces. Any vampire scholar can verify it. It's right there in the archives, properly filed under Draven-Valdren relations, subsection oaths and bindings. Silence crashed through the throne room. Draven's face had gone rigid. Around him, his soldiers shifted uneasily. "You're lying," Draven said, but his voice lacked conviction. "I'm an archivist. Lying about documents is literally the worst thing I could do professionally." Delphine crossed her arms. "And here's the really fun part. Under vampire law, violation of a blood oath means the oathbreaker's entire line loses their status, lands, titles, everything. So if you go through with this coup, even if you win, even if you kill the king, every vampire noble in this realm will strip your family down to nothing. Because if blood oaths don't mean anything, the entire social structure collapses." She was bluffing about that last part. Mostly. She was 90% sure that's how vampire law worked, but there were nuances she hadn't fully researched. Still, Draven didn't need to know that. More silence. Then one of Draven's soldiers lowered his weapon. "She's right," the soldier said. "I remember that treaty. My father mentioned it once, said the Draven oath was ironclad." Another soldier lowered his sword, then another. Draven watched his support crumble, his face twisting with rage and something that looked like fear. "This isn't over," he said. "Yes," Nikolaus said, his voice cutting through the room like a blade. "It is. Casimir Draven, you have raised arms against your sworn king in violation of blood oath. You have led soldiers into treason. You have proven yourself unworthy of your position and your bloodline." He pointed his sword at Draven's chest. "You are stripped of your rank, your title, and your lands. You have until sunrise to leave this realm. If you're still within my borders when the light comes, I will hunt you myself." Draven looked around at his soldiers, but none of them moved to support him. Blood oaths weren't just law, they were the foundation of vampire society. No one would follow a traitor who'd violated one. "You're making a mistake," Draven said, backing toward the doors. "Coddling humans, weakening the court. Someone will finish what I started." "Let them try." Nikolaus didn't lower his sword until Draven was gone. Even then, he kept his stance defensive, watching his remaining soldiers carefully. "Anyone else want to question my fitness to rule?" Silence. Then, one by one, the soldiers, both his loyalists and those who'd followed Draven, knelt, the traditional sign of fealty. Nikolaus finally lowered his sword, looked at Delphine, who stood in the middle of the throne room, still shaking. "You shouldn't have come here." "Probably not. You could have been killed. So could you." He closed the distance between them in 3 strides and pulled her into his arms, heedless of the blood on his clothes or the watching soldiers. "Don't ever do that again. Don't get cooped again and I won't have to." She buried her face against his shoulder, finally letting herself react. Her knees went weak. He held her tighter. "How did you know about the treaty?" he asked. "I didn't. Not until 2 weeks ago. I was cross-referencing family histories and found it buried in a subsection. I was going to mention it to you, but then everything got tense and I figured it might be useful leverage if things went bad. You've been sitting on that information for 2 weeks. I'm an archivist. I sit on information professionally." She felt him smile against her hair, actually smile. Then he pulled back, addressed the room. "Court is dismissed. We'll deal with the aftermath tomorrow. Anyone who followed Draven but knelt just now gets 1 chance to prove their loyalty. Don't waste it." The soldiers filed out, some helping the wounded, some carrying the dead. Thomas gave Delphine a respectful nod before leaving. Soon the throne room was empty except for her and Nikolaus and the evidence of violence. "Come on," he said, taking her hand. "Let's get out of here." They didn't go to his study or her quarters. Instead, he led her back up through the castle, through corridors and staircases, until she recognized the path, the spiral stairs, the hidden door, the rooftop. Snow was falling again, heavier than before, covering the stone in a thick white blanket. The violence of the throne room felt a world away. Here, it was just cold and quiet and beautiful. Nikolaus stood at the wall, looking out over the realm. Delphine joined him, slipping her hand into his. His fingers closed around hers, cold and strong. "I wanted to stop time," he said quietly. "That first night I brought you up here, I wanted to make the moment last forever. I've never wanted that before, never wanted to hold on to anything except power. And now? Now I want 1,000 more moments like this, 1,000 more snowfalls, 1,000 more nights standing here with you. I want time to move, Want to live through whatever comes as long as you're beside me." She leaned against his shoulder. "That's incredibly sentimental for someone who pretends to have no emotions. You've made me soft." "Good." They stood in silence, watching snow fall over the vampire realm. Below, lights flickered as the court began recovering from the attempted coup. There would be trials, executions probably, restructuring of the military command, political fallout that would take months to navigate. But for now, there was just this: winter and peace and the feeling of belonging. "I love you," Nikolaus said, just like that, simple and certain. "I know," Delphine said. "You brought me to the rooftop to watch the snow fall. That's pretty much a declaration." "Is it? For you? Absolutely." He turned her in his arms, kissed her while snowflakes caught in their hair, and the realm sparkled below them. When they finally broke apart, his eyes held warmth she'd never thought possible. "Stay with me," he said. "Not as an archivist, not as anything official. Just stay. Help me rule. Help me remember what it's like to care about something beyond duty. I'm human. I'm going to age, get old, die. I know. And you're willing to do that? Watch me fade while you stay the same?" His hand came up to cup her face, thumb tracing her cheekbone. "My sister loved a human. She lost him and chose to die rather than exist without him. For 200 years I thought that made her weak. Foolish." His voice went rough. "I understand now. Some people are worth burning for. You're worth every moment of pain that's coming. I would rather have 50 years with you than an eternity alone." "That's the stupidest, most romantic thing I've ever heard." "I seem to be full of stupid romantic things lately. It's your fault." She laughed, kissed him again, tasted snow and something deeper. "Okay, yes, I'll stay." "Just like that?" "Just like that. I chose you weeks ago. Everything since has just been me catching up, remember?" He held her close, and they stood there until dawn began its subtle approach, until the snow slowed and the stars faded into twilight. Then they went back inside, together, to face whatever came next. The aftermath took weeks to settle. Draven fled the realm as ordered, though rumors said he'd taken refuge with the werewolf clans, trying to stir up trouble. Nikolaus dealt with it by reinforcing borders and quietly sending diplomats to the wolf territories to ensure no alliance formed. 3 of Draven's closest supporters were tried and exiled. The rest proved their loyalty or were stripped of rank. The military command was restructured, with younger vampires promoted to positions of authority. Vampires who'd grown up in an era of peace and saw strength in maintaining it. Through it all, Delphine stayed by Nikolaus's side, not hiding anymore, not pretending to be just an archivist. She attended court sessions, offered her perspective on political decisions, used her knowledge of history to inform present choices. The court adjusted. Some nobles respected her, others merely tolerated her. But no one questioned her place at the king's side, not after she'd stopped a coup with a 400-year-old treaty. The conclave sent letters demanding her return. She declined politely. They sent threats. She ignored them. Eventually, they sent an ambassador to negotiate, and she sat across from him in one of the castle's receiving rooms and explained calmly that she was staying by choice, that she was no longer their asset, and that if they attempted to extract her by force, they would violate the human-vampire peace accords. The ambassador left empty-handed. The conclave was not pleased, but they had no leverage, no legal ground. Eventually, the letters stopped coming. "You're burning every bridge to your old life," Nikolaus said one evening. They were in his study, sprawled together on the couch while fire crackled. She was reading a historical document. He was supposedly reviewing trade agreements, but mostly just watching her. "I noticed. No regrets?" She set down her document, turned to face him. "Ask me that in 50 years when I'm old and gray, and you still look like winter's favorite sculpture." "I will. Then I'll give you my answer. But right now?" She kissed him softly. "Right now, I'm exactly where I want to be." Winter deepened. Snow fell regularly now, blanketing the realm in white. The castle adapted to its rhythms, to the presence of a human at the king's side, to the subtle shifts in how Nikolaus ruled. He was still precise, still commanding, but there was warmth now underneath the ice. Courtiers learned to read his moods not by his expressionless face, but by the small gestures, the way his hand sought Delphine's in tense moments, the almost smile that appeared when she made sharp observations during policy debates. They found their rhythm. Days spent in their respective duties, evenings together in study or archives or throne room. Nights on the rooftop when snow fell, watching their realm transform under white. He taught her about vampire history, the nuances she'd missed in her cataloging. She taught him about human resilience, about how to balance immortal perspective with mortal urgency. And slowly, carefully, they built something neither had expected to have. Partnership, home, love that felt both impossible and inevitable. 1 year after the first snowfall, Nikolaus took her hand at midnight and led her up the spiral stairs. She knew the path by heart now, could probably walk it blind. The rooftop stretched before them, familiar and magical. Snow was falling. Of course it was. "A year ago," Nikolaus said, standing at their usual spot by the wall, "I brought you up here because I wanted to share something beautiful. I told myself it was practicality. You'd mentioned missing snow. This was a kindness, nothing more. And now I know I brought you here because I was already falling in love and didn't know how to say it, so I used snow as an excuse." He turned to face her, taking both her hands. "You have been in my life for 18 months. You have changed everything. The way I rule, the way I think, the way I exist in the world. Nikolaus, let me finish. Please." He took a breath he didn't need. "I am a vampire. I will not age. You will. Every year I will look the same while you grow older. We have perhaps 50 years together if you're lucky. Maybe 60. And then I will lose you, and it will break something in me that can never be repaired." Her heart clenched. "If you're trying to break up with me, you're doing it very dramatically." "I'm not." He squeezed her hands. "I'm telling you that I know the cost and I'm choosing it anyway. I'm telling you that I would rather have decades with you than centuries alone. I'm telling you that you are worth every moment of pain that's coming." Snow fell around them, thick and soft. The realm spread below, peaceful and beautiful. "I love you," he said. "I want whatever time we have. I want mornings and evenings and boring policy meetings and rooftop snowfalls. I want arguments about filing systems and nights reading by the fire. I want everything you're willing to give me for as long as you're here." "That's still incredibly stupid," she said, but her voice broke. "You're an immortal king. You could have anyone, anything. Why choose heartbreak? Because the alternative is never loving you at all, and that's worse." She kissed him then, hard and desperate, trying to pour everything she felt into the contact. He kissed back with equal intensity, his cold hands cradling her face like she was precious. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, she pressed her forehead to his. "I love you. Whatever time we have, I'm yours. And I'm yours, for as long as you live and every empty year after." They stood together while snow fell and the realm slept and time moved forward, unstoppable and precious. Above them, stars emerged between clouds, ancient and indifferent. Below them, the castle creaked and settled, full of vampires who would outlive her by centuries. But here, now, in this moment, they had each other. And that was enough. The years unfolded like pages in one of the manuscripts Delphine had once catalogued. Some days were momentous treaty negotiations, court celebrations, the occasional border skirmish with werewolf clans. Others were beautifully mundane evenings reading together, mornings planning policy, afternoons in the archives where they'd first begun to understand each other. Delphine learned to move through the vampire court with confidence, her opinion valued not just because she was the king's partner, but because she had earned respect through knowledge and careful diplomacy. She established a historical society program that brought human and vampire scholars together, fostering understanding between species. It was slow, careful work, but it mattered. Nikolaus learned to show emotion in small, deliberate ways, learned that softness wasn't weakness, that caring openly didn't diminish his authority. His court adapted. The realm prospered, peace held, and every time it snowed, they stood on the rooftop together, watching white cover their world. 5 years in, Delphine noticed the first silver thread in her hair. She stared at it in the mirror, remembering Nikolaus's words about time and aging. When she mentioned it that evening, he simply pulled her close and kissed the spot where silver met brown. "Beautiful," he said. "I'm getting old. You're living. It looks good on you." 10 years in, she found him standing before Elena's portrait again, the one in the archives. She joined him silently, waiting. "I used to think she was weak," he said, "choosing death over continuing. Now I understand that she was the strongest person I've ever known. She loved completely, knowing it would destroy her, and she never regretted it." "Do you regret it? Us?" He looked at her, and his ice-pale eyes held warmth she'd spent a decade learning to read. "Every moment with you is a gift, even knowing how it ends, especially knowing how it ends, because it makes every moment matter more." 15 years in, she taught at the Human Vampire Academy they'd established, sharing history with the next generation. Students called her Professor Thornwell, though technically she'd never finished her doctorate. She didn't correct them. Nikolaus attended her lectures sometimes, sitting in the back, his presence both distracting and comforting. 20 years in, she noticed she was slowing down. Not dramatically, she was only in her mid-40s, but enough to feel the difference. Nikolaus adjusted seamlessly, matching his pace to hers, never commenting on the changes. They celebrated their 20th anniversary on the rooftop. Snow fell, as it always did. He gave her a necklace with a pendant shaped like a snowflake, intricate and beautiful. She gave him a leather-bound journal filled with 20 years of small moments. She'd recorded quotes from their conversations, observations about his rare smiles, descriptions of snowfalls. He read it in silence, and when he finished, his eyes were wet. "I didn't know vampires could cry," she said softly. "Neither did I. You keep teaching me new things." 25 years in, she wrote a book about vampire-human relations through history, a comprehensive analysis that became required reading in both human universities and vampire courts. The dedication read, "For Nikolaus, who taught me that winter can be warm." He kept a copy in his study, within arm's reach of his desk. She caught him reading it sometimes when he thought she wasn't looking. 30 years in, her hair was more silver than brown, and her knees ached when it rained. Nikolaus had the castle staff install subtle accommodations railings in corridors, softer chairs in frequently used rooms. He never mentioned it, neither did she. But one night, lying in bed together, she said, "It's getting closer, the end." His arms tightened around her. "I know. Are you prepared?" "No, but I'll face it anyway. With you." 35 years in, she was undeniably old. Lines mapped her face. Her hair was pure silver, her body slower and more fragile. But she still walked the castle daily, still attended important court sessions, still stood on the rooftop when snow fell. Nikolaus looked exactly as he had the day they met, ageless, unchanging, winter-made flesh. The contrast was stark, unavoidable. But when he looked at her, his expression held only love. "You're still the most beautiful thing I've ever seen," he told her on their 35th anniversary. "You're a terrible liar." "I'm not lying. You wear time like jewelry. Every line, every silver hair, every mark there proof of life lived fully, proof of years we've spent together. How could I find that anything but beautiful?" She cried then, and he held her while snow fell and the realm turned white around them. 40 years in, she was 76 years old and felt every year. Her body was failing in small ways, joints stiff and energy limited. But her mind stayed sharp, and her love for the white-haired king never dimmed. She knew it was close now, could feel it in the way her heart struggled, the way exhaustion came easier. Nikolaus knew too. He rarely left her side anymore, ruling from wherever she was, bringing court to her rather than making her come to it. "You should rule properly," she told him one evening. "You're a king. Act like it." "I am acting like it. A king protects what matters most. That's you." Winter came again, their 41st together. Snow fell heavy and beautiful. Nikolaus carried her to the rooftop. She couldn't make the climb anymore, and they stood together at the wall, his arms around her, keeping her warm. "Do you remember?" he asked. "The first time I brought you here?" "Of course. You grabbed my wrist and dragged me up without explanation. Very romantic." "I had no idea what I was doing. I just knew I wanted you to see it, wanted to share something beautiful." "You did. You gave me 41 years of beauty, of love, of impossible, wonderful life." He held her tighter. "It's not enough. I want more. I want forever. We don't get forever, but we got this. That's more than most people ever have. They stayed until she was shivering despite his cloak, despite his arms. Then he carried her back inside, back to their chambers, and held her through the night. She felt it the next evening. The final slowness, the way her body was preparing to stop. Nikolaus felt it too. She saw it in the way his jaw tightened, the way his hands shook when he touched her face. "Not yet," he said. "Please, not yet. I don't think I get a choice." "Then I'll make one. There are ways, vampire blood, transformation. I could change you, make you like me. We could have eternity." She'd known this was coming, had thought about it for years. "No, Delphine." Your sister watched her husband age and die. Then she walked into the sunrise because she couldn't bear existing without him. She took his hand, squeezed with what little strength she had left. "If you change me, I become something else, something that might live forever but wouldn't be me. And eventually, you'd mourn the human woman you loved while being bound to whatever I became. That's worse than letting me go. I don't want to let you go. I know. But you will. Because you're strong enough. Because you've always been strong enough." He pulled her close, buried his face against her hair. She felt wetness on her scalp, tears, real tears, from a king who'd spent centuries convinced he couldn't cry. "I love you," he said. "I will love you until I turn to dust." "I know. I love you too. Every stubborn, stupid, beautiful part of you." She fell asleep in his arms, surrounded by his cold and her warmth, while snow fell outside the window. She dreamed of rooftops and snowflakes and ice-pale eyes that learned to hold love. She woke one more time, briefly. Dawn was coming, painting the windows gray. Nikolaus was still holding her, would probably hold her forever if he could. "Thank you," she whispered, "for the snow, for all of it. Thank you for choosing me, for teaching me how to thaw." She smiled, squeezed his hand one final time, and then, gently, like snow settling on stone, Delphine Thornwell slipped away. Nikolaus Valdren, king of the vampire realm, held his wife's body as dawn broke properly over the castle. He held her through the sunrise he couldn't watch, through the full day, through the evening. He held her until his steward gently insisted that she needed proper rites, proper farewell. They buried her in the castle's memorial garden, beneath a stone carved with snowflakes. The entire court attended. Even the werewolf clan sent representatives, honoring the woman who'd bridged two worlds. Nikolaus stood alone at the grave long after everyone else left, staring at the stone while snow began to fall. The realm's mourning, his subjects said, the land itself grieving. He thought about sunrise, about following Elena's path, choosing oblivion over existence without love. It would be easy. Walk into the dawn, let light consume him, burn away the centuries and the pain. But Delphine had asked him to be strong, to live, and he'd never denied her anything. So he lived. Days blurred into weeks, into months. He ruled because he had to, because the realm needed him, because stopping would dishonor everything Delphine had built. But the warmth was gone. He was winter again, cold and distant and alone. 1 year after her death, he stood on the rooftop at midnight. Snow was falling, heavy and beautiful. He stared out over the realm they'd built together and felt the weight of centuries pressing down. "I don't know how to do this," he said to the empty air. "I don't know how to exist in a world without you." The snow fell, indifferent and lovely. Below, the realm sparkled. Above, stars emerged between clouds, ancient witnesses to immortal grief. He thought about time, about the 41 years they'd had together, the way each moment had felt precious because it was finite, about wanting to stop time that first night, to hold on to perfection forever. He understood now why that would have been wrong. Time had to move, had to flow forward, bringing change and growth and loss. That's what made the moments matter, made love real. Delphine had given him 41 years of learning how to feel, of understanding that softness wasn't weakness, that caring openly was the bravest thing a king could do. She'd taught him to thaw. He couldn't freeze again, wouldn't. That would waste everything she'd given him, so he would live, would rule, would remember, would carry her warmth through the centuries, keeping it alive in how he governed, how he treated his people, how he maintained the peace they'd built together. Some loves ended. That's what made them beautiful. He stood on the rooftop until dawn threatened, then went back inside, back to his duty, back to life. Years passed, 5, 10, 20. The realm prospered under his continued rule, the peace holding strong. The academy Delphine had established grew, educating new generations of humans and vampires together. Her book remained required reading. Her legacy lived in policy and practice, in the bridges she'd built between species. And every time it snowed, Nikolaus Valdren went to the rooftop and remembered a human woman who'd chosen him despite impossible odds, who'd faced down a coup with a 400-year-old treaty, who'd grown old in his arms while he stayed frozen, who'd taught winter itself how to love. He carried her with him, always, in the way he ruled, in the small kindnesses he showed his people, in the way he protected what mattered. She'd thawed him, and he refused to freeze again. It wasn't the happy ending he'd wanted, but it was the one they'd earned, honest and real and full of love despite the loss. And every winter, when the first snow fell over the vampire realm, the king stood on his rooftop and wished, just for a moment, that he could stop time after all. Could hold on to one more second of her warmth, her smile, her presence. But time moved forward, as it always did. And he moved with it, carrying her love like a candle through the dark, keeping it alive for whatever years remained. Winter had learned to feel, and once learned, that gift could never be forgotten. The snow fell, beautiful and cold. The realm slept below. The stars watched above. And Nikolaus Valdren stood alone, wrapped in memories of the human woman who'd taught him what it meant to truly live. He would carry that lesson forever. Carry her forever, until he too turned to dust and time finally stopped. But not yet. Not while the realm still needed him, not while her legacy still lived in every policy, every peace, every bridge between species. He lived, as she'd asked, as she'd taught him, because that's what love required, the strength to continue, even when your heart was buried in a memorial garden beneath a snowflake stone. The snow fell. He watched, and somewhere in the cold and dark, he felt her warmth still, remembered her smile, heard her voice telling him he was being stupidly romantic. "I know," he said to the empty rooftop. "I learned it from you." The wind carried his words away. The snow kept falling. Time moved forward, and the vampire king, who had once wanted to stop time, finally understood why that was impossible, why it had to flow, had to change, had to bring both joy and grief, because that's what made the moments matter, what made love real. He carried her with him, always, through the years, through the centuries, through whatever remained of his immortal life, carried the warmth she'd given him, the lesson she'd taught him, the love they'd built together. Winter had learned to thaw, and that gift, once given, could never be taken back. The snow fell over the vampire realm, beautiful and cold and eternal. And beneath it, in the memorial garden, a snowflake stone marked where summer had once been buried. But her warmth lived on, in policy and practice, in peace and understanding, in the heart of an ancient king who'd learned, finally, what it meant to love. That was enough. It had to be enough. And so he lived.